Jeff, do you know how?
6 months.
6 months, okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Commissioner Lewis, full-time is, it's 40 hours a week
Okay.
to fulfill those minimum hourly requirements. So the Columbus Police Department Academy is a full-time academy, 8 to 4 each day. They do have some evening hours. The Ohio State Patrol Academy is not only a full-time academy, but it's a residence academy. So our deputies that attend there, they're staying overnight, a very paramilitary type of sleeping in the barracks. At the Columbus Police Department, they come home each night and then turn around and go back to the academy the next morning.
Oh, okay,
So,
thank you.
Is the training similar or identical, or between the Highway Patrol and, let's say, Columbus?
yeah, well, the criteria is the same in regards to the certification. The state Peace Officers Training Commission sets those standards, so they're fulfilling the same hours. There could be some debate as to, the style of each academy. The Columbus Police Department's more of obviously a police department, municipal policing, the Ohio State Patrol, but again, they're filling the same requirements. And I will tell you, it does have a slight impact on our budget. Well, probably more than a slight impact is that the Ohio State Patrol Academy right now is funded through the state, and there's no cost to send our deputies there. The Columbus Police Department Academy, that's a contracted venture between ourselves and the Columbus Police Department Academy, or the Columbus Police Department. So there's a cost associated with that. And again, we just can't wait to get them into the Ohio State Patrol Academy to try to save a nickel, because we've got to get these folks trained up and the street. While we have hired some deputies from surrounding areas, that we have not had a real wave of that, but we have picked up some who have had previous training, and we can just plug them in, put them into a field training program. But by and large, it's always been my philosophy to recruit and test for the best possible candidate and then train them to get them on the street. Any questions, any more questions on that?
Yeah, just to clarify, your staffing, the 255 at the top, that's I guess you would call it authorized positions? Correct. And then the one at the bottom, the vacancies, is the current vacancies?
Right, as of today, the vacancies
okay.
we have, and it
So
fluctuates.
just to clarify, so active employees right now is 232.
Does that answer that,
Yep.
Mr. Benton?
Yep.
Okay.
Just want to make sure I understood. Thank you.
Yeah. And I've, historically, to that question specifically, I mean, this office has been, I think, very transparent in talking about new positions. It's less about the bucket of money, and then we'll hire the position. So I've always tried to be very transparent into what our staffing is, and then the budget reflects that request each and every year. So I think there's been that mutual agreement between the board and the sheriff's office. So, okay. Page 6 reflects our 2022 request, and below are some of the allocation of those, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail when we talk about the initiatives that the office intends on putting into place in 2022, which will require the additional positions. You can certainly refer to that as a resource as well, but I think I'll speak a little bit more specifically about those positions later on in the presentation. If you refer to page 7, again, it's really just kind of a reminder of our statutory requirements for the Delaware County Sheriff's Office and for the Office of the Sheriff. The asterisk at the end of those bullet points denotes the statutory responsibility required by law, and then some of the other levels of service and initiatives that the office has been providing for quite some time in Delaware County. Those, again, are fairly self-explanatory, but if you have any questions on those. And then the bottom of that is a chart indicating the activity in our current dispatch center. I know the discussion is, comes up periodically in regards to a fully consolidated communications center, and we're certainly, willing to continue to have those discussions. But I want to, reflect the workload that goes on in that dispatch center as well, and the potential impacts as we further consider possible merger. So there's that data. I think, again, many of you have seen these same charts come out of the 911 center. I think it's fairly self-explanatory, but it does give you an idea between a compare and contrast between 2017 and last year, what our dispatch center worked with. On page 8, again, this is a chart, a map that you've seen in the past. The sheriff's office currently designates routinely 7 different districts that we provide patrol and law enforcement services in. When staffing is available, we'll have an 8th district, which is an overlap of Orange and Liberty townships. I want to draw your attention really to the very bottom of the page, districts 4, 5, and 8, which really represent the southern tier of Delaware County. I don't suspect it comes as any surprise, but those areas are responsible for nearly 75% of the calls for service in Delaware County. That's, continues. You folks know as well as I do, or better, the ongoing growth in the county, and so we don't anticipate any change in that, except that it may continue to go up. And that'll also segue into a little bit some of the initiatives that we're looking at in our budget submission for 2022. I won't linger on page 9, except that it kind of gives you a graph of the offenses, the type of criminal offenses that the Delaware County Sheriff's Office routinely responds to, our calls for service, and kind of a breakdown then in 2020 as well as the top offenses. The last page provided for you is page 10. On the previous page with that graph, some of the primary trends that we have seen in the last year and continue to see are the vehicle thefts and thefts from vehicles. That frankly continued to rise throughout the last year and a half. To be quite frank with you, this was an area that all of law enforcement dealt with in Central Ohio, and a lot of this was committed. As we know, most crime is committed by a few offenders. This trend as well was, we are confident, was primarily committed by folks from Columbus that had moved around the Central Ohio region, moved into the suburbs, into target-rich environments, homes, neighborhoods, and while it's not always Franklin County residents coming into Delaware County, a large percentage of them, and many of them were juveniles from the Franklin County as well. So that we did see that increase, and that was borne out throughout the entire Central Ohio region as well. Theft and larceny reports continued to rise while slowly. We still have a lot of activity out at the Tanger Outlet Mall, and just with those retail outlets, you're going to get increased activity. That's a reality as well. The third bullet point on there, unfortunately, domestic incidents, and by that I mean calls to domestic disturbance, calls to domestic violence. Those continue to be and make up one of our top 3 or 4 calls each and every year. Just a problem that's, I don't think we're going to see any abatement in that. It speaks to our society and culture. Last night, without going into too much detail, our officers responded to another very potentially violent domestic incident that ended, unfortunately, in the suicide of one of the subjects involved. And so again, high stress, high risk types of incidents, and I can't say enough about the ongoing response to those calls by not only Delaware County Sheriff's Office but law enforcement in general. And then lastly, there's a lot of questions about the ongoing issues in regards to drug addictions in our communities today. We have not seen that has remained consistent. We provided for you the information that 135 overdoses in 2019. We're at 130 to date. in this county, including, I don't think the information's reflected there, but either 16 or 18 of those overdoses have resulted in deaths. And just from the top of my head, I think we've administered Narcan up to 50 times in those overdose responses, and deputies are helping save lives, as well as our EMS too in those responses. So, heroin and fentanyl and methamphetamine seems to be making a comeback, unfortunately. The drug use is oftentimes like a whack-a-mole, you deal with one particular drug, then another one pops up. A lot of this drugs we found is, the reality of it is, it's coming in from, another country, primarily Mexico. Fentanyl, we've seen the increase of that, from China as well. So, that problem's not going to go away. We have a great multi-agency drug task force, but again, those trends all lead into our initiatives. So here's where we'll spend a little time. Do they have it up? Okay. So let me get into the really kind of the meat and potatoes of our budget presentation. Page 10, where it says 2022 initiatives, really reflects, first of all, the operational initiatives that has impact on why we're requesting additional deputies. The fact that you saw our bottom three highest population townships are consuming about 75% of our calls for service does impact our core service, in that deputies are, with the current staffing, tied up on calls in those areas. What we are presenting in our 2022 budget is a special assignment or deputy flex unit made up of 5 deputies and a supervisor over that group. That particular unit would be flexible in their hours, flexible in their assignment to respond to where, as I said a moment ago, whack-a-mole, where a problem presents itself. Give you an example. If we have a particular neighborhood that's been hit with a lot of car break-ins or car thefts, that unit could be assigned to when those crimes are most likely occurring, to kind of be proactive in their response. The ongoing request as our county urbanizes for additional traffic control, speed enforcement in residential areas, we are currently not funded to respond to. I've had many conversations with you individually about community policing. Our partners in the county, Genoa Township, Delaware City Police Department, Powell Police Department, are funded with a different level and can provide a different concerted level of service that, frankly, many of our residents in the higher density neighborhoods expect from the sheriff's office. And while we've tried to address those periodically with either a special duty deputy to run some radar in a neighborhood, or to assign through directed patrol a deputy, the reality of it is they're not there very long before they're called to go to one of those 75% calls in another area. So this request does not address the community policing needs or request by, frankly, Liberty, Orange, and on some level, Concord Township. I have been in discussions for years with different township trustees about the possibility of entering into, and if you remember, historically, 11 years ago, this office did have a contract with Orange Township. This does not address that community policing need, but it does help the Delaware County Sheriff's Office maintain its core service to the full county by having a small cadre of specialized deputies to address some certain concerns as they manifest themselves. We are hopeful that, and I've had discussions again with, in recent months with township trustees, to once again enter into concerted discussions about contracted deputies with this office and this board to create community policing efforts if that's what their townships want and request. This submission in our 2022 budget, frankly, does, I think, possibly two things. One, it frees up our other deputies to continue to do their core service. And two, we're hopeful that this initiative might show the value of what those deputies could possibly do on a, not a regular basis, but on a periodic basis, and encourage the trustees from the townships to again come to the table to talk about contracted law enforcement.
Question.
Yeah.
I don't use township names, so I'll call it Township X. One of the complaints has been, there's an issue in some other part of the county, person in our area ends up leaving and we have nobody. So in theory, this unit would do that and that person would stay in Township X. Is that theory?
It certainly could on, again, on a regular basis. It wouldn't fulfill that every time. I mean, the flip side to that concern from Township X is that if there's a problem in their township, they're also having deputies leave other townships to come and provide, whether it's a shooting or, unfortunately, we have seen some increase in violent crime in the southern part of the county, and they get a full cadre of the shift that responds. But to your point, yes, this could help provide less pulling from other districts if that.
Assuming they're available, they'd be
Correct.
a primary before you would pull from that township.
Well,
theoretically.
yes, and again, to address, as I said before, we get a lot of requests for speed enforcement, traffic enforcement in the residential areas. If vehicles are being broken into a particular neighborhood, this particular unit could focus on that and not have to draw units from other parts of the county. So, yes, it would on some level, but not all levels.
One of the other challenges in staffing those districts is the turnover issue, but also people off on military leave or injury leave or whatever. And when we have our administrative meetings, it's constantly, and that kind of and they're kind of the division that gets pulled to, because so many of our other deputies have specific assignments. They're school resource officers or court security or whatever. And so where we pull out when we have shortages is out of the patrol units. So what this unit can help us do is, they're not specifically assigned to patrol, but as we're down, because Chief Scowden will come up and say we're down 3 people on third shift, we can backfill on a temporary basis for some of these vacancies. And I think it'll enable us to get back to the point of actually staffing or at the levels we intend to. And I think could also help address that, perhaps less pulling from some districts, because we have the requisite number of people in the busier areas. So
I should know the answer to this question, and I don't. I could guess, but I'm not going to guess. The fines that we collect at the county level for traffic or whatever, where's that money go? Let's say a speeding ticket for $150 when you write a ticket. Where's that money go?
my sense is, and Karen may know, it probably goes
Does it
back
go
to the general fund.
I have to check on that for sure.
So nobody knows?
I will tell you, from my experience at the municipal level, and Dean might be able to help me recall some of this too, is that, there's a certain portion of those fines go to the state level for victims of crime. There's some administrative oversight. I will caution, we have to be careful that we don't, we're not an enterprise or revenue
No,
system.
I wasn't the purpose.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. There is some funds there, and I'm just curious where they end up. I have no clue, so
Yeah.
apparently you don't either, so.
Well, I know generally there's some, it goes into the general fund, but there's some target that goes into a revenue that's attributed to the sheriff's department. It's not a material amount, because I didn't pay too much attention on the revenue side, that it's changed a lot. I do know from working with the municipal court, obviously it did get distributed out of the municipal court. And I also know, because I've heard that they're challenged a little bit. I think the city's going to be struggling with the cost of municipal court. There's been a big downturn, especially at the state highway patrol level, with traffic citations and the ensuing revenue, not just fines, but court costs. So wherever they're showing up in the county's budget, I'm guessing it's not an increasing revenue stream. But so that's a bit of a
Just a
challenge.
question, curious. Okay, thank you.
I'll keep, this special assignment could also be, they would supplement the drug task force on particular assignments, or any other area where we have crime manifests itself. I want to be considerate of your time, continue to move through this. The drug prevention and reduction, and frankly, we do provide intervention. I just speak just briefly, and I know Commissioner Lewis is aware of this. The jail staff has begun a medicated aided treatment program in our jail. We've done with Cassie Neff and the Stepping Up Initiative, tried to help people that are incarcerated come out of drug addiction. We do a lot of programming and education through our school resource officers and through our community engagement. And then lastly, we have a great partnership with our Delaware County Prosecutor's Office in regards to that as well. So, but again, we continue to focus on those issues as we talked about earlier through our programming initiatives there as well. And then lastly, one of the things that I think a lot of people, EMS has been talking about this, the city's done this, is to partner with and provide a service provider within the office. I think the hue and cry has been that less policing and more social services, and I don't think we will ever be able to, we're not interested in defunding the police or reducing law enforcement services, but we do know that law enforcement has some limitations, and they're dealing with people in crisis, whether it's a mental health crisis or a drug addiction crisis. And what we want to do is continue conversations with the Delaware Moral Mental Health and Recovery Services Board for a partnered position that when officers, deputies engage with people, they can provide a service provider who can go out and try to help those families with the services they need to change their life. So that's just kind of an overview of those initiatives which will impact our 2022 budget. And then Dean wants to talk a little bit about our service level initiatives.
Sheriff, I have
Yes.
a question. I
Yes.
apologize, but I'd rather ask it as a...
Yes.
The service provider, is that coming out of request out of the general fund budget, or is the mental health funding that?
Right now, we don't have any funding directly in this budget request because the dialogue hadn't gone far enough along that line. Chief Wiseman's heading it up, and I think he had been trying to find some partnerships to see once it may end up ultimately being, if it gets legs and it happens, the sheriff's budget may have to cover 30% of the cost. But so there isn't anything specifically in the budget for that, but that's something we're going to try to pursue and find that resource if we can next
So
year.
it's not currently part of your budget?
No.
Okay. And it would seem mental health would have a role or a financial interest in that. I'm just curious.
Yeah, and Deanna Brandt has been a part of these early discussions as well. And again, we've got a great partnership with her. So if we can get to that point, we'll be discussing more specifically what that impact would be on our budget. So, I mentioned earlier, and I know we're getting up against our time, but I'm going to request just a few more minutes, obviously. The benefit of having a chief business officer to kind of take a look at our overall office as we reach the 10-year mark for my tenure and what the next 3 to 5 years look like. So I'm going to ask Dean to address some of those initiatives that we've placed in the budget as well.
Thank you, Sheriff. I'll try to be really quick. I've been here a year and a half, and if you're familiar, my prior career spent 30 years doing a lot of what you guys are tasked with, at least from a budget standpoint, is looking at that correlation between expectations for services and what at a division or department level they feel the needs are and what the resources are to kind of allocate that. So it's an ongoing, it's a challenging thing. And I had some initiatives to try to do it at a city level, trying to work more proactively, more strategic, more business plans, more looking down the road, anticipating. But a big part of it was trying to really focus our thought process on levels of service. Because too often we get wrapped up in a budget process and it becomes numbers and line items, and the budget, this went up 3%. And even in dialoguing with the community, it's hard for them to figure out what's what, and so we really tried to move down a path to build a bridge between the resources we have and the money we're spending and budgeting and the services and the delivery of that services. Takes some effort, can be challenging, but it was one of those things I was interested focusing solely on a given operation, a sheriff's department versus across the whole city, and spent some time getting to know how the sheriff's department functioned and internally and some of the external issues. And one of the things that came back at some point, we have some challenges and some service level issues. One which Russ referred to a little bit before with the, the townships and the expectation in the more urbanized townships that they want a higher level of service. And as I said, we're just not funded to provide that level of service. Internally, as the sheriff's department's grown, I think Sheriff Martin's made in my opinion, has done a very, very good job of raising the bar and how they do what they do. It's one thing to get resources, but trying to be efficient and effective and measure that to a certain extent about outcomes. And I think he's done a really, really good job raising the bar to a certain extent since he's been in office. But internally, it seems like we've become very compartmentalized, and the more and more people are assigned to certain tasks, it's almost like we're getting to a point where it's hard to be flexible. One of the ideas behind this flex unit was to, instead of just add more people to court security or over here, the challenges that pop up, sometimes we maybe can't justify a full-time person, but we need, 20, 30% of their time. Well, how do we find that? The typical approach is we request another person, and we'll find other things to do. So we're hoping to think, and work a little bit more smarter, and if we can make it work to have a unit that can fill in for some of those gaps, because there are obviously many more requests for staffing than what's included in the budget. But as I was looking at some of those challenges, one of the things I came across, and I'd seen it before, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it, was the Commissioner's EMS master plan that was done in 2008. Obviously, I was familiar with it from a previous position and knew the challenges that were kind of driving that analysis. Some of it external, some of it internal, into how the EMS service operated, and got to thinking more and more. We have some of those same challenges. Internally, I think we're at a point where looking strategically at how we do what we do is important. It's a good time to do that. Externally, as was mentioned before, we've got service level issues. Townships, there's some jurisdictional issues. Who pays for what? How that plays out. Sheriff Martin mentioned the whole dispatch function, and how does that make sense? Is there some efficiencies that can be gained through some consolidation? What I got to thinking, I said, it really might be a good idea for the Sheriff's Department to reach out and go through that process. Because I thought this was a pretty good effort. There's always challenges in doing something like this, but I think it'd be very, very, very helpful for the Sheriff's Department to help us work through some of our issues, some of them external, some of them internal, but also I think it can help because I've tried to interject maybe a little bit more forward-thinking approach to budget requests. Let's not just say, well, this is what we need or this is the new stuff. Connecting that back to what are we getting? What can we communicate to legislative bodies or the public for what we're buying for that infusion of additional money, if that's what it is, and make that connection. So that's a process, but I think we want to kind of start down that process of looking at it a little bit more from that business perspective. I've heard the length of my career, government should be more business-like, and that's true to a point, but generally people don't want us to be too business-like, but that doesn't mean we can't be efficient and effective in how we use these resources and be able to communicate that back. So anyways,
that's not in the budget. That's just
there is a budget request that
Okay.
it's about $50,000. I reached out and I found out roughly what this cost. Now maybe there was change orders beyond
I'll
that.
make a comment, and I'm not opposed to the concept, but a lot of people out there have agendas. So the person that does that assessment, if they bring their agenda with them, it may not advance it in a positive way.
Exactly.
So it's just an observation. You may agree or disagree with that
Right.
statement.
I
I have
ha-
to say it carefully.
I had that discussion with Sheriff Martin, and one of the reasons, even potentially, assuming we can do it from a purchasing standpoint, is to reach out to this consultant, is, A, they do have the same services they can provide for law enforcement and dispatching, is trying to get as best we can an independent viewpoint. We don't want to create any illusion that we're going to go out and do this master plan study and all it represents is the world according to an individual or whatever else. We really want it to be kind of open-ended and try to bring some of those thoughts, agendas if you have it, but weed through the agendas and really try to focus it on more, rational type of recommendations or what might come out of that. And so that was
So more pragmatic things than
exactly,
theoretical things.
even from the standpoint, and I had to poke him a little bit to say, are you comfortable? You're an elected official. this might put out there not just external issues, but even internal issues, because you have internal agendas sometimes. Again, I think our hope is that they can reach out and talk to various stakeholders to a certain extent, whether it be township trustees, whether it be some of our staff, perhaps even commissioners from that standpoint on a couple of these issues, but ultimately bring that back. And it's not intended to just answer, how do we handle this issue with this request for township higher levels of service. It's really to try to look and change, to move to that next level as a sheriff's department, to thinking critically, thinking analytically, and kind of setting the table. Sheriff Martin's not going to be around forever. Obviously, it's an elected position. Who knows who the next sheriff may be? But I also think it can help provide a little bit of a basis, at least whoever that may be coming in, to step and take a look at it and say, trying to quantify a little bit what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and that we're on an ongoing basis monitoring that and thinking about that. And it may be something that in 5, 7, 8 years it needs to be updated. But if that's the case, it ought to be based on, well, let's look at what our goals or strategies or how we were approaching were, and what's changed and why, and what that dynamic is. So it helps. It can help external communicating that. Certainly can help internally to make sure strategically we get more to being on the same page and how we do what we do. So there is a $50,000 request that's included in a professional services line item. And I think that, just wanted to communicate that. I think it'll be a real good tool for us. In a similar way, but not quite to the same extent, and this is something that has been funded as far as the 2021 budget, is a jail needs assessment. There's some issues there at the jail. There's facility issues, but more than anything, it's really a lot. What we want to be able to look at is how we utilize the space. I'm not so sure there's a need for more space, but redirecting and perhaps looking at who's being housed where, and making some internal changes, because the world of corrections and how that's handled has changed a lot. Some of you may be familiar with what Franklin County's done with their new jail. The concept of throwing somebody behind bars, it's different, and things like COVID and separate, it's just changed a little bit. So, again, it's not a budget, but I just wanted to mention it. We're just getting rolling now. We'll get somebody on board, but that'll be worked on in 2022. We want to look at it from that perspective. We also want to look at the facility there, and to a certain extent, and try to develop a little bit more of a long-term look at what may be some resource needs, maybe looking at 5-10 years out, not unlike, I think the Commission's office was, and Mike Fromer was working on, the consultant, kind of looking down the road a little bit and what that means, but helping us because there are some big ticket items there, whether it's the building itself or just some of the equipment, some of the new things we've acquired, but to kind of have a little bit of a roadmap and be able to provide that from a resource standpoint. I know that was helpful to me at the city. If we had I didn't like to hear those things that pop up. All of a sudden, we need $400,000 to do this. But look at it so we can kind of see what, and I know from a long-term financial planning can help a little bit to know that there's something looming out there that's probably going to be a big ticket item. And the other thing, and it is a part of the budget, it's a pretty big part at the jail, is a little over $500,000 for a jail management software application system. The system they had was really a offshoot of the alert system, and at a county level we switched to this Tyler CAD RMS system. One of the products they looked at pretty much exclusively is Tyler has a jail management system that has some capabilities to interface back with the existing system that they put a lot of money into, but updating that system and being able to, because the previous system really hasn't been, it's been years, and so that's a pretty big item.
Yeah, I had a question on that while we're on that topic. The state in their last budget allocated significant funding to jail construction, and don't know if something like that could be funded through I think it was $150 million.
There was one thing I was aware of. I think there was some funding that might flow for, but it seemed to me it was capped at like $10,000 for some software type of things. But we'll certainly explore anything related to that.
Yeah, this is big. I mean, I think it was $150 million that was in the last budget for jail construction across the state. I don't know if it
Jeff may have looked at it more closely than I do, but I mean, when I skimmed that, it looked like it was directed for counties that did not have the economic means that perhaps Delaware County. Did you see anything different than that? Have you looked at that at all?
I did look at it. I know that the majority of that funding was for the construction of jails, and I know they awarded that recently. I saw that. Some regional jails, I think it's southeastern Ohio. I don't recall jail software on there, on that list, and I actually just had it up this morning too. I was looking at it again. But we will research that and see if that applies to this.
Or down the road, you know, as we renovate,
Sure.
you know, redo the interior of the jail, there may be some funding for that. So anyway, again, just.
One of the other things related to that jail's needs is we're not doing any actual design work, although that it'll probably be somebody that has the capability to do some, you know, schematics. There is the space ultimately when the new offices opened up that our deputies will move out of where they're at the jail. It's about 6,000 square feet. And so how to best utilize that at the jail with some of these issues. We just don't want to, you know, just move in and figure out later. So we want to kind of have a game plan in advance of that. Any of those modifications, you know, we'll have a little bit of an idea, an order of magnitude, what, you know, they think it might cost, and obviously work through the building division if and when it gets to that point a year or so down the road when that needs to move to that next step of actually doing some design.
Anything else, Steve? No. I realize that jail software is a large ticket item. We don't need to go into the level of detail now, but you know, prior to Mike Fromer's resignation and moving on, we were working with him and with Karen on the revenue stream that would offset the cost of that. And so I think Dean's worked with that. I think Karen's familiar with that.
How's that work, the revenue stream? How does that
What
work?
revenue stream would.
Real quick, just you know, there's a commissary out there at the jail that collects fees from the or money from the residents that they buy, you know, cookies or pencils, or one of the other big areas is phone calls and communication and even video and all that sort of stuff. And you know, state law says that the jail facility is allowed to quote unquote create a profit, but those funds, if there is a profit generated, need to be spent on the inmate services provided directly to the inmates. And so there's this debate about how much of that falls under that classification. At a point in the past, there was a determination that some of those phone commissions went back into the county's general fund. That was kind of outside. There was calling cards. We've since revisited that and looked at that because it stopped in 2018. That money wasn't coming into the county's general fund for whatever reason at that time. I did get a legal opinion from the prosecutor's office, and we've got it now firmed down. But there's, I'm going to go back and I've calculated what that would be going back to 2018. I think we're on pretty good standing if anybody challenges it to get that put back into the general fund. Along with that, there's just some funds that have built up in this inmate account, and also some of the sheriff's sale that, for whatever reason, I think can go back into the general fund. So one of the things I did include as a revenue source for 2022 was about $540,000 into that jail budget, which is what I order of magnitude think that transfer will be in. So it'll go back into the county's general fund. And the discussion with Mike was, I think that by and large could offset that software purchase.
So could you give us an itemized kind of a
Sure.
page that kind of, these are the funding sources, these are 500, whatever it is.
Right.
So we can kind of get an arms around it. You said commissary-wise, you could charge a little premium, whatever the right word is. Or?
Well, we can't necessarily, I mean, we can, we're allowed to have a profit. We contract out those services, so there's an external entity that provides the food and whatever else, and we have an affiliate of theirs that they put in, they've installed their own equipment so that the inmates can go on and make phone calls. Externally, somebody can go online, if it's your child that's in jail or whatever, and you can put money on an account, all online and all that sort of stuff. But obviously that vendor is going to charge fees. We can charge, if their fees are $1 a minute for the call, I'm just making that up, we can charge $1.50 a minute or $2 a minute, and the difference can come back in from our standpoint as a commissary profit. But the revised code limits what you can use that on. That's why we actually have a commissary account, an outside account that, you know, we used it to buy the mail scanner that was purchased this year and a couple years ago, the body scanner, because there's a correlation back to the inmates. We can use it to buy books and cable service and things like that at the jail. But the legal opinion we've got was how far, what about others, and are there a way to segregate things and say they're not necessarily commissary profits? And I just recently, within the last week or two, got that opinion back from the prosecutor's office. So I'm going to move forward and
So
we'll
you
provide
give
a
us
summary.
Summary page.
Exactly.
That kind of put in black and white what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Karen can make a note to follow up on that, make sure. Got it, great.
Oh, she's been on it, believe me. Already. Been waiting.
I have a question. I'm on one of the boards I serve on. The commissioner next to me talked about how much food costs were going up due to inflation. The number he gave me seemed, let's say, excessively high, so I have a feeling he may have misunderstood. But are our costs going up on the food for the inmates? Are we seeing any impact due to inflation at this point?
The way we handle our food is we contract that out. And so there's a third party, and we have contracted rate per meal. Now, we had to adjust when COVID hit because it was also it had a lower threshold. They never assumed that our jail population would drop below 100, what did, and so their per unit cost went up, so they came back and we amended the agreement. Haven't heard anything, and I don't know, Jeff, if you had, where they're saying that, hey, our costs are up. I know we had a 2 or 3 year agreement, but at some point that may be something they bring
So
up.
right now it's status quo.
We haven't heard anyways that they're coming back, so.
Thank you.
We'll wrap up. I just wanted two things in regards to that discussion on, the revenue stream. I want to address philosophically, Dean and I are both on the same page. Whatever we can do to help offset the general fund budget to support the Delaware County Sheriff's Office, we maintain that philosophy. The second thing is we do want to be very judicious and careful in that, I've said it a couple times, law enforcement and corrections in and of itself has to be careful that it's not viewed as an enterprise or a revenue generator. I mean, there's a lot of discussion on a lot of levels in regards to the term debtor's jail and on and on. So we are consider those things as well. But when we've identified through the law what's available, that's what we want to try to do to help offset some of these initiatives and proposals. I'll conclude by just talking about the policy initiatives. I've mentioned earlier that community engagement, we continue to be concerned that we're meeting expectations of our community. I do think the standard has risen over the last few years, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, with the availability of cell phones and the media and the internet, people are scrutinizing more closely law enforcement. And I've said for 30 years, always do this job as if the 6 o'clock news was watching. But as a result of recent discussions throughout our country, we want to make sure that we are being responsive to the community that we partner with in regards to our services. We are committed, and there's money in the budget for personnel early warning system, correct, Dean? And one of those things is to take care of our most valuable resource, and that's our personnel. To identify through metrics when deputies are responding to a certain amount of incidents of trauma and reduce risk for their own employee well-being, and to bring it to our attention if a deputy is starting to respond inappropriately because of whatever reason might be. So we're engaged in that as well. And then lastly, I know I've come before this board in the past about accreditation. We are confident that we're going to break ground in 2022 for a new sheriff's office, and that will finally address, after a decade of my tenure, the needs to have a safe and secure property storage facility as well. Those things will have to be in place before we become fully accredited, but we are trusting that that train has left the station and moving down the track, and we will enter into a contract with CALEA in January of 2022 to create the timeline for full accreditation. I think you're familiar with this in Genoa Township when Chief Taylor did it. So once we sign the paperwork and commit to that office-wide accreditation, we have a specific time frame that we've got to get that done. A lot of the groundwork has been laid, but our commitment now will begin in earnest in January of 2022, and our budget reflects a portion of that as well. So just in closing, I do think the office has been responsible with the budget that you afforded us in 2021. When Mike Fromer was here, we were asked to make contingency cuts because it was unknown to us what was going to happen during COVID. And the office, with Dean's help, we complied in that request. And I think we've maintained that throughout, and we're confident we're going to be able to conclude the budget year without coming back to this board with any supplementals. So that's just my way of saying and affirming this office remains committed to being a good steward of what you provide for us. We know that we've provided an ambitious budget for 2022. We think we've provided some justification for that. And as always, we're willing to answer questions and be available for further discussions as you make these tough decisions around everybody's budget. So, any comments or questions for us?
Until we kind of digest everything, but there is a deficit between the revenue projected, and so we have conversations we're going to have. Your CALEA comment, I think the last I heard, we're talking summer of 23. So how far in advance can you start that process? Because it's probably going to be 18 months at least before the building is finished.
It's 3 years.
Because it got delayed because of...
We have 36 months, once we sign the contract, to complete the standards for accreditation.
Okay.
3 years.
And pay the fees.
And with the pay fees, but we want to be in that new facility before then.
Well,
So-
the goal, we're not slowing that down. It's things,
Yeah, we want to be there too.
the COVID and the bidding kind of took it out of our hands. We want to get it in more, getting the evidence stuff, et cetera, moved. We want that too, because it needs to be in a more secure location. So we're on the same page. I just didn't want the CALEA timeline to be faster than we're going to get the building finished. And I just want to make sure we don't get ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and frankly, we've submitted it this year because of conversations I had with John Melvin and that timeline, and I've talked to you individually, and I feel confident that the commitment is there, and really this is one of the primary. Dean talked about this master plan and succession planning. One of the primary reasons that I determined to include a third elected term was to see that we could get the facilities that I think the Sheriff's Office has been long overdue and needing to take them to that next step. And I think this Board of Commissioners, as has been shown, whether it's in EMS or dispatch, has always held the operations in this county at the highest level. And I do think a new facility and accreditation for the Delaware County Sheriff's Office, both the law enforcement side and the jail side, we can all be proud to say that across the board, we're providing the best services to the residents of Delaware County. So we're anxious to partner with you on that as well. Any other comments or questions?
I just like to thank you for all your efforts here and the wonderful job, outstanding service that you give our residents. And you are universally respected and can't say enough about that. I mean, that's right now with everything that you've had to go through with defunding and all the terrible things that have happened there. This is Delaware County residents are very safe and very confident of the excellent services that you provide, Sheriff, along with your team.
Thank you. I would give them full credit for that. I'm surrounded by great people, and frankly, it's a great county to serve in. And as I said 10 years ago when I took the appointment in the subsequent election, there's no reason why Delaware County shouldn't have the best sheriff's office in the state of Ohio.
Right.
You mean they don't currently?
They do have.
Okay,
I said that 10 years ago. And let me be clear, we're
on the cusp.
we're pretty close to being number one if we're not number one. So
I had to put it straight.
Yeah, thank you, Sheriff, and everybody.
okay. Well, we know we went over our allotted time. I appreciate you for your patience. We're available
No,
if you
you're
have
on
any
time.
I
questions.
expect it to be a half hour, frankly.
Okay.
So thank you for your time, and thank you for all you do for this county.
Thank you.
There will be some follow-up.
Okay.